When I wake, you 24. For my ankles hit the floor. Take a break, say thank you, Lord. Then I dip up out the door. Don't lack it, I can't afford. Built tough like a Ford. Pack the word like a sword. This a battle, this a war. For your mind, it's a war. For your time, it's a war. For your money, it's a war. This ain't funny, it's a war. For the kid, it's a war. For how you live, it's a war. For your focus, it's a war. We ain't joking, it's a war. Let's tell the squad to squad up. Let's uplift and lift God up. He laid down his life and got up. Rather we wins or lose, they not us. Can't tie us down or hold us back. Bible blicky, we holy strap. It's a war and we on attack. On point like we on up. Look, he filling the blanks when I'm feeling so blank. When I sit and I think and I drain on my thoughts like I swim in a tank. And God's on me and I'm pulling my rank. Don't tell me I can't. Like a man with a tank, bro, I'm ready for the war. No stepping like Morse code. One day he gon' come knock at the door. So better get hit like a torso. When I wake, you 24. For my ankles hit the floor. Take a break, say thank you, Lord. Then I dip up out the door. Don't lack it, I can't afford. Built tough like a Ford. Pack the word like a sword. This a battle, this a war. For your mind, it's a war. For your time, it's a war. For your money, it's a war. This ain't funny, it's a war. For the kid, it's a war. For how you live, it's a war. For your focus, it's a war. We ain't joking, it's a war.
Yeah, it's a war. Gotta cut the tie, you feel a pull. Bible say the flee, let's keep it dead. Elevator, don't work, take a set. Gotta watch the world and do the most. I'm just as radical in my approach. You can ask the kids who checking phones. Nah, don't unlock it, what's the code? I was once timid, now I'm bold. Bought my father business, I don't troll. Time to spread the G, I won't go. Let her force it back and watch him grow. In the blood, I'm covered head to toe. Sacrifices made to save a soul. Trying to pack the kingdom, that's the goal. Down and be the lamb, not the goat.
When I wake, you 24. For my ankles hit the floor. Take a break, say thank you, Lord. Then I dip up out the door. Don't lack it, I can't afford. Built tough like a Ford. Pack the word like a sword. This a battle, this a war. For your mind, it's a war. For your time, it's a war. For your money, it's a war. This ain't funny, it's a war. For the kid, it's a war. For how you live, it's a war. For your focus, it's a war. We ain't joking, it's a war.
Fighting with a masquerade, war. The devil I eradicate. I'm a soldier for the Lord above. And for him, I'm a basket case. It's not the show, I got the sword on me. Time to lock and load, I brought a whole army. That squad control, we about to shift gears. Bring the Lord near, no more fear. War. And with a Bible verse, I could replace a curse and make a demon hurt. They gon' need a hearse, and I'ma need a shovel to put him in the dirt. And that's the way it works. War. Meeting with the Lord, that's one day. Gotta read more than Sunday. Rather be a victim of the faith than the face of disgrace. I'll be making a mistake.
When I wake, you 24. For my ankles hit the floor. Take a break, say thank you, Lord. Then I dip up out the door. Don't lack it, I can't afford. Built tough like a Ford. Pack the word like a sword. This a battle, this a war. For your mind, it's a war. For your time, it's a war. For your money, it's a war. This ain't funny, it's a war. For the kid, it's a war. For how you live, it's a war. For your focus, it's a war. We ain't joking, it's a war.
We're at war. We're at war. We're at war. We're at war. We're at war. We're at war. We're at war. We're at war.
Welcome back after a few years off to the Unapologetic Apologists. I am your host, Stelman Smith Jr., and today a guest of mine and me are going to be reviewing a discussion between Alex O'Connor and Greg Koukl on the Diary of a CEO podcast. There was a third guy there, but I don't know who he is. But we're only going to be reviewing the portion between Alex and Greg. Before I introduce my guest, a couple of quick housekeeping things. First, if you're seeing this later, comment on the video. That really helps the YouTube algorithm. Question of the day: is Alex O'Connor overrated? And I don't ask that to be mean or disrespectful, but at this point, it feels like I'm watching a reincarnation of Christopher Hitchens, which would be totally respectable and fine if it weren't Alex himself who said a few years ago that he was kind of leaving his Christopher Hitchens rhetoric roots behind him and becoming more sophisticated. So let me know what you think. More on that later. One more thing, or two more things rather. The name of this channel is going to be changing to My Name's Stelman Smith Jr. The Unapologetic Apologists is not going anywhere. That is still the name of the show. But the YouTube channel name is changing. One, to make it more personal, but two, to distinguish it from my other YouTube channel, Stelman McGuire. That is my wrestling persona. A link is in the description if you want to go check out that channel. I am a professional wrestler, working really hard at that, hoping that leads to WWE one day. But if you wouldn't mind subscribing over there, if you're interested. If not, don't worry about it. But last thing, this stream right now is on Rumble. It's going on Rumble. You feel free to leave this video and go watch this on Rumble. That would really help build that platform for me. Follow me, Stallman Smith Jr. I'm not working with them. They're not paying me, but I really would like to perhaps help spearhead Christian apologists moving over there. I think it's really important for us to build a platform over there. YouTube's been kind to the Christians because they're not as political, but we know how YouTube kind of handles the conservative realm. So who knows? Maybe just build a platform over there before we are desperate to do so. With all of that out of the way, I want to bring in my guest. He is the host over there at Worldview Mastery. Tim Howard, how you doing, brother? Oh, you are muted.
Perfect. Good to be here, man. Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we get into the content, why don't you tell people a little bit who you are and what you do over there on your YouTube channel?
Fantastic. Well, hello, guys. My name is Tim Howard. I'm 26 years old. And as Stillman mentioned, I run a initiative platform channel ministry called Worldview Mastery. You can find me on all platforms, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, etc., so forth. Pretty much what we do and what my main goal is to raise a generation of Christians that know how to defend their faith with confidence, but not through the normal apologetics means. I am passionate about teaching Christians how to think and actually have permission to take full control over how they come to conclusions for their faith. And I'll tell you right here, and Stillman, you can probably attest to this in your own journey. It's really helpful that we have a spokesman and other apologists out there that can give us answers. But without the tools to be able to evaluate arguments, you are actually not even in a position to have the resources to evaluate for yourself whether or not an answer is good or an answer is bad. And I will tell you, unfortunately, there are a lot of bad answers to some really good questions. So my goal here is, I've seen in my experience that sometimes I had to do the work myself. Sometimes I couldn't just go on Google and find a quick apologetic answer. But it was when I started learning how to think, how to reason for myself, that I started to find my faith confidence skyrocket. So that's what we do at Worldview Mastery. We give you the tools, we give you the frameworks, we give you the process for reasoning on your own so that you don't have to rely on other people. You don't have to rely wholly on outsourcing your thinking, that you can be a confident Christian that can take full control over defending your faith. So taking mastery of your worldview. That's what we do.
Yeah, that's great. And I highly encourage everyone to go over there and subscribe to that channel. And I guess before we get into things, that also is something I'm realizing is coming up a lot more in discussions I'm having with members of my church. Is not only does this work with apologetics and evaluating like the worldview type discussions, but even just evaluating scripture, right? You run into people who's like, oh, I don't need all that philosophy. I don't need human logic as they deem it. I just need the scriptures. And it's like, well, no, actually, you kind of have to bring a lot to the table to even evaluate the scriptures for yourself. Make sure you're not just taking verses out of context and just making them say whatever you want. Like, I feel like the people who criticize me doing all that philosophy bring just as much philosophy to the table as I do. It's just that they're not aware of the philosophical presuppositions they come with, and then they're just finding scripture to support that.
Absolutely, man. And oftentimes, there's a proof text there. We have Paul saying, don't get caught up in, vain arguments. We have this idea of the philosophy of man, but as good hermeneutics would have us understand, the philosophies that he was talking about were specifically had a Jewish context. They were philosophies that got in the way of the devotional nature that Jewish people were so familiar with. That to believe in Yahweh was not just a mental thing, but it was one that you actively lived out. Knowledge puffing up is one that doesn't lead to devotion. And that was his biggest problem. It never had to do with philosophy or thinking. A lot of people don't know this, right? But hey, look where good thinking leads you. So there's a reason why right there.
Yeah, that's great. So we're going to be reviewing sections of this discussion between Alex and Greg Koukl on the Diary of a CEO podcast. By the way, a link to that is in the description, in addition to other links to things I'm going to be referencing, like Nate Sala from Wise Disciple has done some responses to this. So I'm going to be taking some stuff from what he said. Greg Koukl did a response to it himself. I linked that in the description. And, I should have linked in the description. I can do it afterwards. You actually reviewed other parts of this discussion on Inspiring Philosophies channel. I would highly encourage people to go check that out as Well, what are your thoughts on the question I raised at the beginning on whether or not Alex is overrated? And again, I'm not saying that to be disrespectful, but like as I watch more and more of him, I'm noticing, I even put in the title, I just named him Hitchens Jr. because I feel like he's bringing a lot of rhetoric, but not really much substance to these kind of objections he's raising. But he's so good at the rhetoric, he's able to trip people up in mid discussion.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, man, I had a first person view of that myself when I debated him on Jubilee, right? That there were some philosophical sleight of hands that I had to take account of. You know, when you have a discussion with someone and later on your brain kind of starts to feed you more information about what really happened. And I remember talking about it, right? And one of the things that he did was, he kind of moved a discussion in a direction that I already admitted I didn't need to go in. And I was like, why did we go in that direction in the discussion? I look back and I go, oh, wow, there was a little philosophical sleight of hand that happened there that I didn't catch in the moment. Doesn't matter. This is not a cope. This is just description. It is what it is. A lot of people don't catch that either. I think that a lot of people, and I'm one of those people, man, where I was so happy when Alex moved out of the new atheism. The new atheism's dying. Thank God we did the work, right? The philosophers and theologians, we towed that line for years, okay? So we did something with that. But I was so glad when Alex had such a big platform and saying, hey, I'm done doing this. And his whole entire cult following was built on that. And now he's generated a new following of people who seem to be kind of quasi-spiritualists, people that might be a little bit skeptical of the church, but people who like to think deeply. They like really what he has to say. Unfortunately, that he breeds a guise of authority that I think that you and I are seeing is just unearned. And I will tell you, right, I did hang out with Alex after the Jubilee event. And, there were certain conversations that we had with him afterwards where, he was out of his depth. There were certain things that he could not talk confidently about that he would otherwise talk confidently about online. This is not a dig at him. Alex, bro, if you ever see this, bro, I would still kick with you, man. I hope I see you soon, right? But I will say that a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't see that. I have people that I know in my local church community who are like, I really respect Alex because he's an intellectual. And listen, I wouldn't call him an intellectual. I think that he's someone who likes to think deeply about things. But for someone who's been well-trained in philosophy, someone who's like myself, who's been doing this for the last 10 years, I know how to tell the difference between someone who is doing this for the love of the game, right? And someone who is, has kind of their pet things they like to think about. I think Alex has some pet things he likes to think about. I think there are some hills that he just will die on no matter what. And I think that's what we see. And so I think that there's a little bit of unearned confidence there. And then the public doesn't know otherwise. I'm starting to, unfortunately, get red pilled more and more every day that people on the internet aren't as smart as I once thought they were. Same thing with adults, right? These are just things that happen. So I think that's what's going on here.
Yeah. And again, Alex, if you see this, you're welcome on this channel anytime. I won't hold back, but I could easily see us being friends. A very likable guy. But look, ideas are ideas, and when we think our ideas are wrong, we're going to go after them, and this is the game, and so we're here to do this. And part of the rhetoric, last thing I'll say before we actually jump into the video itself, is this is why rhetoric is so important. It's important for everyone to learn. It's especially important for apologists to learn rhetoric. You hear a lot of talk out there about the negative side of debates. Oh, debates are about winning. They're not about necessarily seeking truth. Well, they can be both. And some people think, well, I'm not going to engage in the rhetoric game because that's just trying to trick people. I'm just going to stand on the truth. Well, look, guess what? You have a problem presenting the truth if you're not good at rhetoric, especially if you're facing someone like Alex. You have to be able to meet on that playing field. There is nothing wrong or negative about that sport, in my opinion. I think that's fine. You can treat it like a sport. And people say, oh, well, it's not for getting at truth. Well, it is. That's how you present truth. You have to use rhetoric, and you have to be able to go after other people who are themselves good at rhetoric. You can't play the game otherwise. So do you have any thoughts on that before we jump in?
Oh, dude, I used to be the guy. I had pride, bro. I was like, man, I don't need this rhetoric. I'm all about the pie. I'm the pious person who's going for truth. That was me. Not even that long ago, probably 3 years ago, I was that way. And then I completely don't believe that anymore to this day. I will tell people, for people that might be still on the fence about this, rhetoric is only bad when you use it to make the weak argument. Objectively, when you use it to make the weak argument look like the strongest, okay? But there's nothing wrong with using rhetoric to express the strength of an objectively strong argument. And I think that's where rhetoric actually has its place. It's like, spoon feeding someone medicine with a little bit of sugar, right? Okay, they need the medicine, and they need the cure. Okay, what's wrong with making it a little bit easier for them to take the medicine? Okay, I view the same thing with rhetoric. Hey, listen, if rhetoric is a vehicle that's helpful to making a strong argument be perceived as strong for just a communication act itself, who am I to say? Do I really have that much pride to say, oh, I have higher truth tracking endeavors? No. So for anyone on the fence about that, maybe that mental model can help you out.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just okay with treating it like a sport. When you show up to the debate, it's a sport. You're not showing up there to be super open-minded. And I mean, you should be honest. You should be willing to admit if you don't know an answer. Right. I'm not saying in any way be dishonest, but you're showing up to win, especially for the sake of an audience, especially in the era we live in with all these YouTube debates, everything being so public, being done in front of audiences. You're showing up there again, like you said, not to be dishonest, to be honest. To in service of truth. But you're showing up for the sport, for the sake of advancing the gospel. And you have to be good at it. And it's okay to gain a following, being good at rhetoric, being good at debate, because the people who are good at that need support. And so I'm all in favor for it. So here we are going to jump into this. If you would like me to pause it throughout, if you have something to interject, let me know. I kind of have points I'm already planning to stop it at. But like I said, just interrupt me if you need to. We are going to get right in here.
That we're in a context of a discussion where usually the boot's on the other foot, and I'm sort of being told that as a non-religious person, as an atheist, agnostic, I don't have a satisfying explanation. What am I going to say at the footstool of somebody who's dying of cancer? But it sounds to me, at least today, like we don't have a very plausible alternative in Christianity. For example, I did have a few questions, which maybe I'll be permitted the time to ask. And I don't want to bang on about this, but it's important because this is ultimately, you're here to represent your view and a worldview more broadly. And this is, to me, the question of suffering. And you've explained your views about the fool. And
yeah,
he already made an error here. Some people might think this is a little bit pedantic, but he says, I don't have some people say I don't have a satisfying answer. And I've actually heard Alex say that he doesn't know. But he says, on Christianity, we don't have a plausible alternative. Well, first, the only way in which you can have a plausible alternative to something is if you actually have an explanation that's at least a candidate on the table. By Alex's own admission, he doesn't have that. So you don't call that an alternative. It's the only explanation on the table. And even if you have an explanation that's a bad explanation, even if that explanation is bad in and of itself, if there's nothing to relativize it against, meaning if there's nothing to compare it against, to compare its strength, that's the only thing you're left with, then the plausible thing to do there isn't to be agnostic. The rational thing to do there isn't be agnostic, is to accept the explanation, no matter how strange it might sound to you or unsatisfying it might sound to you. That's a psychological phenomenon. We have to separate psychology from explanation. David Hume, famous atheist, Scottish philosopher. We love Hume, right? David Hume said the wise man apportions his confidence to the evidence. But you can't apportion your confidence to evidence. Saying that something is evidence for or against something is a product of an inference. But you can't say evidence is for or against something if that thing doesn't exist, with Alex said by his own admission he does not have. So Christianity actually isn't up against anything. It's actually standing on its own. And so Christianity has an explanation. We might not psychologically jive with it, but it's the only thing on the table. So the irrational thing to do is to reject the answer that you do have, even if you don't like the answer that you have. I think that's Alex's first big blunder that he's making here right off the gate.
Yeah, and this is going to come up more later in Koukl's responses within the same video. Not only do only the Christians have an answer, and by Alex's own admission, we'll get into more about how he's an emotivist later. Like, he doesn't have any answer to this, and he's specifically presenting it in moral terms, which he'll deny later. But like, one thing I noticed was, like, not only do only Christians have an explanation here, but only Christians even have access to the problem in the first place. Alex would deny that evil is even an objective reality in and of itself. at least the Christians can acknowledge evil as a reality before they then go and try to solve it. So I thought that was interesting.
On crude forms of emotivism, it's I remember when I took a morality and ethics class, I remember one of the ways in which it first clicked for me was like, if you want to say racism's wrong, the translation in emotivism is kind of just saying like you're raising your fist up when you're saying boo to racism, right? So wrongness within the framework of emotivism is a negative attitude of some kind. It's an expression of a negative attitude of some kind, but that's as far as it goes. And so I don't know if the framework really gives us that much ammunition, that much heavy lifting to be able to put itself in this position that Alex seems to think that he has the high ground on.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, very briefly, because it just occurred to me, some members of my church group are probably either watching this now or going to watch it later, might not know what certain terms mean. If you wouldn't mind briefly outlining what emotivism is.
Yeah. So in morality and ethics, specifically meta-ethics, we have conversations about what the nature of moral statements are. And so, for example, right, we will say things like, hey, it's good to open the door for someone if they are, in proximity behind you. Hey, it's a courteous, good thing to open the door for them to let them in, right? But we might all agree as a society that's a customary thing to do. Meta ethics asks the question of, well, what is the nature of this thing that we're calling good? And what Alex would say is, which is his thesis of emotivism, he would say that really what we mean by good or what we mean by that bad is all that's doing is it's expressing an emotion of some kind. So moral statements don't express facts about reality. So objectively good or objectively bad, rather they express a subject's emotions towards whatever the thing we're talking about. So if I say, hey, it's good to open the door for someone, that sentence is not expressing a fact. That sentence is expressing my emotional state towards it, or my emotional inclination towards or against it. And so the way in which emotivists would see racism is they would say some people have an emotional inclination against it, right? But it's not a fact. Saying racism is wrong doesn't express a fact. It just expresses someone's emotion. That's what emotivism would say.
Yeah, and I have a lot more to criticize there, but we will get there when it comes up. I'm going to bring this video back up. We'll get back into this.
I wanted to let you put them in full before I asked a few questions, but the first question that jumps out at me is the question of pre-human suffering. We're not the first species to inhabit this planet, and before we existed, billions of years, I don't know if you believe that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old, but billions of years, hundreds of millions of years at least, of animal suffering.
Yeah.
And that is experienced. They like, and you could say that it somehow is less relevant or doesn't matter as much, but if you saw me right now step on a dog's tail and watch it squeal, you'd tell me to stop, because you know that absent just the effect that has on our human situation, that's bad for the dog. That kind of stuff was going on for hundreds of million years before humans were around. That means before the fall.
That's true.
The second question I have.
Let's do one at a time.
Yeah, and I don't entirely know how to answer that. Part of the problem comes when you create a world in a certain way that has certain cause and effect kind of things. So pain is there for a reason. Pain is there so that you can avoid something that's harmful to the body. When you start feeling pain, you withdraw from it, okay, in a very simplistic sense. It also has a downside. And the downside is that pain is painful, and sometimes dying is very painful too. So there's a trade-off there. Now, I haven't worked all those details out, okay? But what I look at is a larger picture, because I can't refine all of those things for my own thinking. The larger picture is we all live in the same world that is filled with pain and suffering. So then the question is, who has the best explanation writ large about how that works? No explanation, well, maybe some, are going to go very granular and get here's why your baby is suffering in this moment for this thing. We're not going to be able to do that, but we can understand why the world is broken. Now, if you don't hold that the world was made for something better, then the world we see right now is not broken. It's just the way it is. There is no moral assessment whatsoever that we can make that would make any sense.
Yeah.
But we constantly make moral assessments, which is why you're bringing this issue up
No, it's
about
not.
suffering.
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to say briefly before you come in here, because you talked to Alex specifically about animal suffering, and he really likes to focus on that as opposed to like human suffering, because Alex said this, and I wonder what you think of this, because this dawned on me one time when Alex was saying, look, I'll grant you all of the theodicies for human suffering. He said this once, I will grant them for sake of argument that these theodicies are sufficient to explain human suffering, but they don't apply to animals. And I really like Greg's explanation there, because by definition, they would apply to animals if you're granting the theodicies for humans, because God has to set up the universe in a certain way for those theodicies for humans to play out with certain laws of physics, certain cause and effect relationships. By definition, the theodicies for humans would apply to animals.
Yeah, so to steelman Alex's position, Alex has done a really bad job of explaining why this is a problem. And I know that because I've had countless Christians come to me and go, what's Alex's whole issue with animals? And I go, okay, great. I'm like, I even literally had someone at Jubilee, literally right after we were done filming, the moment we were done filming, someone walked up to me and said, what is Alex's whole thing on animals? I'm like, okay, do you got a second? Because I can explain it to you. So basically what Alex is doing, he's doing a, and I'm all for popularizing, I'm all for making high level academic work accessible, but he's not even really doing that. So I really do fault him for that. He's really just focusing on the rhetoric here. So the idea here is animal suffering is put forth as the strongest problem of evil because it is supposed to be a counterexample to the efficacy of the soul-building theodicy. And the reason why that is because if you want to use a free will theodicy, or specifically a soul-building theodicy, which would state something like, in order to become a virtuous person, you have to suffer. For you to be a compassionate person, there needs to be something for you to be sad about. For you to be a forgiving person, you need to have opportunities to be wronged. For you to be a self-sacrificial person, there needs to be something worth sacrificing your life for. For you to be a mourning person, right? For you to be a resilient person, you see what I'm saying? And you can add these orders of the highest order. So to be a forgiving person of the highest order, there needs to be a lot of pain. So to be a virtuous person, a logical precondition is pain and great in many trials. But what that requires is a certain level of cognition, which is a certain level of cognition that can engage in meaning-making activities. One of the things about meaning-making activities is a robust form of memory, and the ability to find patterns, and the ability to form attitudes based on those patterns. These are some preconditions for meaning making. So if I go through something really traumatic, as a human, I have the opportunity to choose to look back at my circumstances and to integrate that into my life story such that I don't lose in the end. I can choose to make my trauma a meaningful part of my story. That's a beautiful thing about being human. And that then contributes to our growth. And that's what makes us a virtuous person. Harriet Tubman, for example, she was actually beaten so bad one day that she actually, her brain, she had some trauma to her brain. She actually ended up contracting she developed narcolepsy based on how bad she was beating her brain. And in that, she still rescued the slaves. We view that as a great, excellent display of a life well lived because of the pain. But that only happens if you are at a certain level of cognition and you have a certain degree of will that you can exercise. Animals, however, they're not afforded that same privilege. And so this is what Alex should be saying. Yes, humans have a higher order mental capacity that allows them to build their souls. Animals don't. When a deer suffers, the deer just suffers. This is the difference in philosophy and ethics, what we call the difference in moral patience and moral agents. We wouldn't say a deer is a moral agent. We'd say they're a moral patient. we would say that you and I are moral agents. We have agency over our moral lives. Animals do not have agency over their moral lives. So they're in this position where they just got to suffer, but they don't have the tools to make sense of their suffering, to come up with grand stories and existential meaning over their suffering. They just have to go through the suck. And then so Alex is going, wait a minute, if a reason for why suffering exists, if the purpose of suffering is to build our souls, there's a large population of sentient creatures that can't even do that. It sounds like God failed at his job. God created creatures and does not prevent suffering so they can build their souls. Okay, but animals can't build their souls, so wouldn't that be an example where God is free to prevent their suffering? But God doesn't prevent their suffering. So why the heck are animals suffering? And the idea is, well, this creates a really bad problem for the proponent of the soul building theodicy. Okay, that's the steel man, the position. That's what Alex is trying to do here. He's saying, sorry, the normal responses doesn't work because animals do not possess the constitution mentally to be able to soul build. So there's been a lot. So I didn't even get to this point when I debated him on Jubilee because my own side kicked me off, dude. How about that? Yeah. And literally right when I was about to tell him my solution, but alas. But anyway, so the idea here, right, is, well, on the Christian worldview, there's such a thing as an afterlife. And because animals are moral patients, they don't need salvation to exist in the afterlife because they're not morally held accountable for anything. And we know in Revelation, we actually get seeds of understanding that in the new heavens and new earth, there will be animals. And so a philosopher such as Trent Doherty says, well, if God is able to resurrect humans and give them brand new bodies better than we have now, they're able to do greater things. Talks about we'll be able to do it like Jesus did, walk through walls. He goes, why couldn't God do that for the animals who weren't able to build their souls because they didn't have the brain capacity to do so? Why couldn't he give them new bodies with new brains? Akin to human intellect, where these animals then, instead of building their souls now, they just build their souls later. So soul building is accounted for. Now, but this is a resource that's only available to the theist. This resource isn't available to the atheist. And so one of the things that Alex tried to do to me in the Jubilee shoot is he said, okay, so what? The deer just suffers? And I say, listen, on the Christian worldview, the deer's life involves two phases of existence, their earthly phase and their post-mortem phase. I said, you can hyper-focus on their earthly phase as much as you want, but that doesn't contextualize their life. Their total life history also has to be accounted for in their post-mortem life, which is the afterlife. And what he said, this is a sleight of hand I didn't catch at the time, but now I'm like, dude, I wish I would have held him accountable on this. He said to me, well, if we're just focusing on their earthly life. Now, Alex, what did I just say? I just told you on the Christian worldview, there's more to this life than the earth. Why are we going back to just discussing the earth? He has to do that. Because if the moment that you allow the Christian to bring in the afterlife, problem solved. Problem solved. All suffering is redeemed. All things are restored. Problem solved. So he has to focus on their life. So for me, all I go is, okay, if the problem is that they can't soul build because of their constitution, then what? All God has to do is give them free will and a more mental capacity? Well, God's omnipotent, not a hard thing to do.
Yeah.
Problem solved. What? And then my question, Alex, is why can't he? Because Alex wants to say something like, well, that just seems like it's an ad hoc move. You're just trying to patch holes. Alex, you give me a reason why God won't do that. Give me a reason. Because we evaluate what to expect from someone based on their character. If you told me, hey Tim, if you invited me to your house and you said, hey Tim, I gotta head out for a second, but I have a buddy who's coming over, and he's a vegan. He's just coming over because he needs to like grab some food out of my fridge. So don't be surprised if you see him grabbing food out the fridge. I'll go, okay, cool. But I know that you have like a couple ribeye steaks in the fridge. It would be weird for me to expect him to grab the ribeye steaks given you told me that he's a vegan. Now, when we say that someone is an X, like I am a vegan or I am a runner or I am a swimmer. What we're doing is we're generalizing over a certain instances of behavior. So you're not a swimmer because you swam once. You're a swimmer because there's a pattern you can establish. So when you say someone's a vegan, it means this person has been practicing being a vegan for a certain amount of time where you can say what this person is this is a part of their character. So we make judgments on people's character all the time. So the correct judgment I should make is, oh, okay, if his friend is vegan, then he's most likely not going to eat the steak. He's going to grab something else from the fridge. That would be a correct assessment. Well, let's just do the same thing for God. If God is all loving and he is agape love, which is agape love is the will, the good for the other, for their own sake, well, then if we try to fit God's agape love with animal suffering, the question we then ask is, what would it mean for a God who desires the will, the good of another for their own sake do, given that animals are helpless to build their souls? He would provide a way for them to achieve their good, which would to build their souls. So actually, I have all the resources I need to expect God to do good by these animals. And an example of doing good by these animals is, hey, one mechanism is that he can resurrect them. Now, here's the thing. I'm not claiming I have this knowledge. I'm just saying it would be unsurprising. If I get to heaven one day, Stelman, and I see the animals who once suffered, and God goes, and by the way, I redeemed all the suffering of all the animals who suffered, I don't think any of us would be surprised.
Right.
That's all I need. Okay, so it wouldn't be shocking that God does this. Can we move on now? Are we done with the animal suffering? Like,
Yeah.
is this really that crazy of a question? But alas.
Yeah, and again, it goes to your point where we have the resources for that. Even if we don't know exactly what God's going to do in the afterlife, at least we have the resources to explain it, whereas he doesn't. Right. And if people want more on this, by the way, I know you went more in depth with Mike Jones on Inspiring Philosophy. You guys reviewed the Jubilee debate. So I would encourage people to go check out that if they want even more. And quickly, just to clarify my point, when I was saying that by definition, the theodicies applied to humans would also apply to animals, I wasn't claiming in the same way. I wasn't saying that because humans can build their souls on Earth, that therefore animals can build their souls on Earth. What I was saying was, in order for humans to live on the kind of planet with the kind of laws of physics, with the kind of structure that would allow them to build their souls, if animals are existing in the same world, that's the sense in which I'm saying it applies to them, is that they're part of that same creation, that same story, even if they don't build their souls on Earth the same way we do. But to your point, I don't see a reason that, Alex likes to give the example of a deer who gets its leg caught in a thicket and then just starves and dies. And he's like, look, no soul building there. But I don't see any reason why in the afterlife the deer can't reflect on the role it played in God's overall divine plan for history and count its existence as good. And then have an eternity of bliss following that. But to your point, Alex also doesn't focus on that. And I'm going to have a lot more to say on this later when it comes up in this discussion, that Alex has a real problem of claiming he's doing an internal critique, but isn't actually taking the entirety of the Christian worldview into account when doing his internal critique. It's only
and that's why I asked him in the beginning. I was so proud of myself for this. I asked him, I said, okay, but you're doing an internal critique, right? And I just needed that concession. And he said, yes. He shouldn't have said yes. He would have actually saved himself. He said, no, I'm purely doing an external critique. Okay, if he's doing an external critique, then he doesn't need to play by my rules.
Yeah.
But guess what? You said internal critique, so you need to play by the theist rules. The analogy I always use, Stelman, is this. I always say, it's like you sat down knowingly that you were going to play chess against someone. And then the moment that chess starts, the timer starts ticking, you object to the game because it's not following the rules of checkers. He's doing something no different here.
Yeah. So I'm going to pull this back up.
I've been very careful to avoid moral language for precisely this reason.
Let me explain it seems to me that you are bringing kind of smuggling in moral categories with the suffering issue. Because if I said, I don't care about the suffering of millions of years of organisms that had experienced pain, that kind of casts me in a kind of a negative moral light. You don't have to say that. It does seem to me that you're smuggling in the notion that suffering is bad morally.
I know that people often do that. I'm specifically avoiding that because I've had this conversation 100,000
so
times, and that's the accusation that gets brought up. And some people do that, but I'm specifically, you can rewind the tape. I make great pains. I don't say the problem of evil, for example. I say the problem of suffering.
Okay.
If you said that you didn't care about suffering, I would say that you're probably just being inconsistent with your Christian worldview, for example. I wouldn't say that you're doing anything immoral in the context of this conversation.
I'll accept the qualification.
So what I'm saying is that if Christianity were true, we would not expect the kind of suffering that is present in the natural world. I'm not saying that on my worldview, that suffering is wrong and must be fixed and there's some moral element. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that it is unexpected, if Christianity were true, that suffering would be...
Okay, so pause real fast.
Well, the way
in particular...
Yep.
So that's nice to say. It's unexpected on the Christian worldview. If you actually know how to draw expectations based on the Christian worldview, which Alex does not. Alex actually will do this thing where he'll say, this is unexpected on the Christian worldview. And then when you press him like I did on how are you motivating these expectations, he starts to smuggle in his own moral framework.
Yep.
And by the way, for everyone listening, like, this is what the problem of all arguments, I call it arguments from evil or arguments from suffering, do is they actually program in to the very essence of the discussion, this this myth, I call it, of a shared value assessment that the atheist and the Christian are coming to the table with the same values. I explained on a call-in show the other day that the way in which Christians conceive of the lovingness of God is not like how atheists conceive of the lovingness of God. For us, for God to be loving, that we have 2,000 years of tradition. It's actually one of the things that we've been united on, which is God. You can find me no theologian and no Christian philosopher of today or antiquity that says that God creates this world so creatures are on average happy. No one believes that. No Christian has ever stated that God creates this world for the purpose of maximizing pleasure or maximizing comfort. But what we have said is that God creates this world to maximize our pains so that it gives us opportunity to live the good life, which is a life of sacrifice like Christ. That's what we say. And we say that God is loving because we know that we are given a promise that there will be a point in time when God shows us to our faces that he loved us, and through that love, I have restored and created anew everything you went through, so that we know that what we went through wasn't for naught. That's why we say God is loving, because only a loving being comes in and desires to overcome suffering and desires to redeem things and desires to be in our lives through that redemption. That's how Christians view the love of God. The atheist goes, yeah, but I don't know why God would do that. I don't care that you don't know why God would do that. I'm telling you that Christians have a very specific understanding of God's love, and we're fine with that. So for me specifically, someone like even on a personal note, my prayers for when I'm going through hard things isn't, God, why are you allowing me to go through this? At one point in time I did. And through spiritual maturing and growing and through my soul building, right? My prayers are now, Lord, show me just that you are here with me. Those are my prayers. And by the way, I still think God's loving.
Yeah.
So now mine is actually about God sees me suffering, but I desire not to not have suffering, but I desire to see him in the suffering. Well, what if we have that hypothesis? What if that actually is the Christian worldview? That God desires to enter into our suffering with us. Well, now it doesn't look so wrong that they're suffering anymore, does it?
Right.
So Alex doesn't even know how to generate expectations on the Christian worldview. He says he does. He doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, and that for me is a big rhetorical point I want to point out here for Christians out there who maybe want to engage in these discussions or even just know how to evaluate them. It's really important for you to notice what is happening here rhetorically. Alex does this thing where he's claiming, on the one hand, I'm not making any moral claims, because again, he's an emotivist. He doesn't believe in objective morality. He is a moral anti-realist, right? So from his perspective, hey, on my worldview, I don't have to come up with any solution because suffering is just suffering. There's no moral quality to it. But then on the other hand, he's claiming it's an internal critique. Otherwise, it doesn't work, right? And so what he'll do is he'll kind of step in and out of his worldview and into the Christian worldview as is convenient in these discussions. He'll step into his worldview to say, I'm not making any moral claims, because he knows once you make moral claims, then there's an argument for theism. But then he'll step into the Christian worldview to be like, hey, your God would be kind of a jerk if he were just allowing these animals to suffer needlessly. And then you say, well, but Alex, now you're trying to cast me in a negative light. When he steps back into his worldview, no, I'm not making any moral claims here, Greg. I'm just saying you're being inconsistent with your worldview. And he's stepping in and out, right? The problem with his internal critique, though, as we kind of pointed this out earlier, is he's smuggling in his own moral assumptions about how Christianity ought to work, right?
Yeah.
Or what Christianity is failing to do in terms of providing a solution.
And everyone listening, I want to just interrupt you real fast.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, what you just said in the last 5 seconds there, if there's anything anyone takes away from this, is what you just said there. Alex is objecting to how Christianity ought to work. Okay, that is the biggest point of the discussion here. So I'm really passionate about Christians no longer being doormats when they defend their faith and actually feel the permission to actually go on the quote unquote offensive. Ask the other person questions. I'm always about that. Christians listening, there is no problem of evil until the atheist agrees to your terms. And until they do, the discussion goes nowhere. And I mean that. I'll say it again. Like, the problem of evil does not exist until they use what I think to fuel their argument. So what Alex should be doing is he should be going, Greg, could you please give me the privilege of laying out what you believe about God's character, so I know that I'm making my argument correctly here. Greg, okay, thank you. Here's it is. And then Alex, step 2, check whether what Greg has just said contradicts the world we see. Alex is failing the first step of an internal critique. He's not even doing the first part. So there is no argument. This is a non-argument. This is a failed internal critique. What Alex is doing here is purely for show. It's showmanship. But anyone who knows what we're doing, like you, myself and I, we're like, are we done yet? Because what you're doing here isn't doing anything, which is why I was so adamant to him on Jubilee. Okay, remember I said I haven't even told you what I believe yet. Why the heck are you making any of these claims? And he kind of just had to sit back and go, okay, well then what do you think? And then he interrupted me a bunch of times. He didn't even let me even give my full thesis because he has to, right? I don't know if you have anything to add on that, but I just really wanted to be clear on that so people get that.
No, that's a really good point. I mean, I remember a discussion you had, I don't know how long ago it was. There was a couple people on the panel. I think the main guy was Danny from Phil Talk, who was a friend of mine. He's been on the show a couple times. And you were kind of pointing this out, that look, there needs to be a certain moral framework that's set up for you to even object to evil and claim there's a problem of evil. And Danny's kind of point was like, well, whatever your moral presuppositions are, I'll just go with that. Like, he didn't want to have to justify a moral framework from his point of view. So he was trying to grant your worldview and going, well, whatever a moral theory you have, that's the moral theory I'm using to justify my claims that there's an inconsistency with suffering.
Right. And I remember that.
And your response simply could have been like, oh, so we're using my moral framework? Well, perfect, because for my moral framework, there's not an issue and we have a solution. And that's
right,
the end of the
exactly.
day.
And I remember now, what I wanted to get clear on is I was still even in the dark of how we were even using terms. Like, I would hear the concept like should, and I'd be like, okay, wait, are we using the word should in the same way? And yeah, man, I mean, some people who outside looking in might go, Tim's being kind of pedantic and meticulous. but actually I'm doing what I'm supposed to, right? It's not a failure on my part. It's a failure on the individual who's claiming kind of victory from the start here. Well, it's kind of like that assumption. Well, whatever your moral framework is, it's still going to have a problem anyway. What?
Right.
Says who? Not me. But you feel free to check, right? So yeah, that's usually how it goes.
Yeah, and I'm glad Greg realized it later in his response video, because here he's going to kind of concede, and I get that in the moment you're kind of caught off guard. He's like, oh, okay, I'll concede that you're not smuggling any morals, Alex. But then he said later in his response, no, he absolutely was smuggling in morals. Again, it's that stepping out of his worldview temporarily into the Christian worldview to say, hey, there's these certain assumptions I make about the Christian worldview. Those are the moral assumptions he's smuggling in. Is his understanding of the Christian worldview only parts of it. And so I think it's important just for people to recognize that when they're evaluating.
Well, I don't know if you noticed, just real fast before you head back in, Alex is, for whatever reason, notice his demeanor and his sensitivity that he's adopting in this part of the conversation. I found that he started almost like in an unwarranted way, started getting a little bit aggressive with his strategy here, because Greg said, well, you're saying things that would make me look in a moral light. And Alex says, I've done this 100,000 times. That's not what I mean. It's like, okay, dude was just didn't know what you were doing, bro. Most people do the opposite. Why do we got to get like that, dude? Like, and so I think that it goes back to what I said in the beginning of this episode, which is this is one of the hills that he feels like he has to die on.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a thought I had on that, and it just left me. But yeah, it'll come back to me as we go.
The non-human animals.
No, I understand that. Okay, and the way I'm looking at it.
But do you understand that I'm not smuggling in those moral?
Sorry,
because you said.
Yes, you are, and I just remember what I was about to say. There's a kind of comical irony to me. Greg kind of said, "Hey, if I said I just don't care about this, that casts me in a negative light." There's an irony there, because even though Alex wouldn't say he doesn't care about it, obviously Alex cares about it a lot. As a motivist, he's the one who says, well, there just kind of is no reason for this. Like, what kind of light does that cast you in? So something to consider there, Alex.
That I'm smuggling in moral terminology.
Okay, and I buy that. It's okay. All right, I understand your point.
Did you have a second question?
I did, which is that if the fool is the explanation for, shall we say, the moral evils that people...
Yeah, this part I really want to get into is the fall, but did you have any more on the animal suffering before? Because it's about to kind of suddenly switch topics.
No, everything's good. Let's keep going.
Cool.
Commit, like the Holocaust. The reason why people have a proclivity to commit the Holocaust is because of the betrayal of God's trust. A few million years ago, whenever it was you think it was, if Adam and Eve's transgression is the explanation for why humans have a sinful nature and act upon sin, then why did Eve act upon the sin before the fall had happened? Eve must have had a proclivity to sin in order to betray God in the first place. And so I don't think it suffices to say that the explanation for why we have human beings with a proclivity to sin, like Adolf Hitler, is because of the fall, if the fall is a result of a proclivity to sin from Eve.
The nature of...
Okay, and here comes another smuggling in of things. And what's funny about this, we talk about the importance of apologetics in the church for answering questions like this, but this is stuff I've heard in just like run-of-the-mill Bible study groups. Alex is presenting this again rhetorically as like, hey, I've got this insight you probably haven't considered about this inconsistency in your worldview. And I'm like, dude, I've been in Bible discussions where people who are not apologetically trained at all have already talked about this. Like that this isn't new to us. And so I don't know if you want to jump in yet before we play a little bit more, but one thing that notice what he's doing, he's saying the proclivity to sin was already there. That's an assumption. And I don't think it's a justified one. I think we're going to admit, the ability to sin obviously was there. That's different from a proclivity to sin specifically as a result.
Yeah, because the proclivity, that's a good point, because the proclivity language is a little bit it's like a quasi anachronism in the sense that the way in which we would it's more like an equivocation, because the way in which I would discuss like humans today in 2025, if I were to say, hey, humans writ large have a proclivity to sin, there's actually 3 dimensions of sin that you can talk about. There is sin done to us, there's sin that we do, and then there's sin done around us. And it's this complex reciprocating interactum, you could call this entity, this ecosystem that just fuels itself. I wound you, you feel wounded, you wound someone else because they're wounded, right? Other people that see the wounding, they're wounded from seeing the wound, like, and then we have generations of this. It's kind of that hurt people thing. But we live in a time in humanity where we've perpetuated sin done to us, sin done around us, and then the sin that we do. We've had generations of doing this. When we say proclivity to sin, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how things are now. It makes no sense to impose that onto the Adam and Eve scenario, because that would mean then that this is already in circulation in the exact way we're talking about it today, and that's not what we mean by proclivity. It's more so kind of what you're talking about, right? Which is, there's this, I mean, I don't even think we even need to get into the conversation about like what the main kind of base human drivers or impulses are, but this idea of sin with this rich kind of spiritual baggage to it that pervades human society today. To say that, and an Eve acts in that exact same way is misleading.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Freedom, in my understanding, my view, is that it can initiate things. Okay, you don't have to have, in a certain sense, deterministic element in your soul that forces you to act a certain way. Why did Adam and Eve in this case, act the way she did? Because she was capable of initiating a free action.
Do you think she acted
this
immorally?
Free action in terms of rebellion, okay? That's the nature of freedom, okay? I can't get into her mind. And I think sometimes asking questions like this, why did she, under those circumstances, do what she did? I can't answer that.
Do you think she did something immoral?
Yeah, she disobeyed God.
And what did she eat from the tree?
Hold on, let me play this real quick.
Tree of the...
I'm not sure.
She ate from the tree of the knowledge
of good and evil. Right.
So she ate.
No, notice the way he just did that. It was almost condescending, like Greg Koukl hasn't read scripture and he doesn't know what the tree's called. He thinks he's got a gotcha in a kind of condescending way, like you would be talking to a Christian who's never read their Bible before. She ate from the tree of...
I know. I know. He's giving him time. I know. And this is the part. This is what I mean. I was like, hey, Alex, why are we kind of doing it this way? The way in which he's approaching this is, I don't want to amateur psychologize, but it's a little bit fishy. So apart from like the meta there, I mean, and what he's about to say about the tree of good and evil is also very misleading, because we even have, I forget what passage of scripture in the Old Testament says this, but we actually have Solomon crying out to God, saying, Lord, give me the knowledge of good and evil so that I can lead your people. Now, wait a dang minute. Are we to believe that Solomon had zero understanding of morality prior to this prayer? He said, God, give me the knowledge of good and evil. Okay. The claim that the atheist has to make is that by saying knowledge of good and evil, that there was zero knowledge prior to partaking of the knowledge of good and evil. Right. Well, we have a straight counterexample in scripture where after the knowledge of good and evil is partaken from, we have Solomon praying for that knowledge. Now, how can Solomon pray for the knowledge of good and evil if the tree of knowledge of good and evil has already been eaten from? Okay.
Yeah.
What scholars have noted is there is a certain respect. There's a certain aspect of knowledge of good and evil that's being talked about. For Solomon, the aspect is so he can lead well. It just basically just means, Lord, give me greater discernment, wisdom, and understanding so I can accomplish this task. Yeah. Merely saying knowledge of good and evil doesn't imply that there was zero of it prior to this. And scholars have actually noted that there was a certain kind of knowledge that Yahweh did not purpose for them to have at that time. And actually, scholars have noted that Yahweh was going to give it to them, but in the right way.
Yeah.
And so it's not an evil, it wasn't this common understanding that this tree is some kind of demon is actually false, right? So we have a lot of misleading, again, Sunday school cartoon versions of Christianity being imposed here. That's the first thing I just want to say as setting the stage.
Yeah. And again, in the description are reviews that Nate Sala did of this, and he points out that like the knowledge of good and evil, and he cites the passage you just said of the Solomon. He also cites a passage with David where it's used the same way, and he says this is a Jewish idiom that it's not strictly knowledge that you didn't have before. It more so means taking upon yourself the authority to define right and wrong. Eve would have had not a generic knowledge. At a minimum, the knowledge she would have had was that God commanded me not to do this, so it would be wrong to do it. She had that.
Yeah. She would have understood the wrongness of disobeying God. Yeah. There's no reason why we can't say that, given this general background knowledge.
Yeah. And what Greg's about to point out is that she didn't have the experience of good and evil. And I think that's kind of a window into the same kind of answer that Nate's having, which there is an initiation here. There is a new thing happening here, which is Eve is taking upon herself something that hadn't been done before, which is the authority to define right and wrong. But I'll have more to say on that in a moment.
From the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, implying that before she ate of it, she didn't have a knowledge of good and evil.
Well,
how can she have done something immoral before she
Alex,
ate it?
can I ask you a question?
Hold on.
No, this goes to a contradiction to my view, so I just need to clarify this.
Do you understand what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, I understand entirely, sure.
If she hasn't eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, she doesn't know good and evil. So how does she know that it's evil if she hadn't yet eaten from the knowledge of good and evil?
Because the knowledge of good, the word knowledge oftentimes in the Hebrew is talking about experience, okay? It is not talking about a mental awareness, okay? She wouldn't have not been able to even understand the command not to do something if she didn't have those moral categories. I think that's part of the image of God in man. Consequently, she knew she ought not do it, but she still chose, for whatever reason, to do that. And that act of disobedience created a big mess.
What that means is that the
hold on.
does not explain the proclivity.
No. I want to get to that in a little bit. But I like what Greg said there about there being experience, because he wants to claim there's like, again, just this complete incomprehension on the Eve's part of like, what are the categories of good and evil? What even are they? And so, God's mean for judging her for something that's wrong. And there's clearly indications within the text of Scripture that she did have some knowledge of it. And I like Nate Sala's response when he said she doesn't have to have a complete and total comprehension of good and evil to know what the word don't means. And I thought that was just a really, really cool way of like pointing out, like, we don't grant Alex's argument here, but even if we granted it, this is something I want to say, that even if we just granted what Alex says, how else are people supposed to learn? Right? So like you have a 1-year-old who's trying to stick their finger in an electrical socket, and no, don't do that. Oh, how dare you? How dare you give them any kind of consequence? They don't have a knowledge of good and evil. Yeah, well, how else do they learn?
And this is actually an important point, because I think that what Alex is doing to steel man, because I'm an honest person like that, is I think what Alex is doing is he's saying that I think what he wants to do with his leading questions is to point out that the Christian explanation makes things worse, because it's basically like someone who has a job in a company, but they have that job because they're also the ones creating the problems. I'm employed because I create my own problems, and that's when they employ me to solve them. And I think that's kind of the way in which Alex is saying it, which is, okay, Christianity has a solution, but look how messed up this whole thing looks. Because what he wants to say is that, so what you're saying is that billions of people who have yet to exist now have to pay for a simple act of defiance. He wants to basically make an improportionality argument, saying it's a disproportionate response to reality on God's part to punish billions of humans that would come after Eve, wholly distinct and unconnected to the time frame of Eve, who don't even understand why they're even in the picture to begin with. But now they're kind of held accountable from the start. So note what we have right now. We have a lot of theological baggage. We have an Augustinian view of original sin, an Augustinian view of the fall. So we have some theological traditions that we're just assuming are self-evident, which they're not. Again, I use the word Augustinian, because there's a very specific person in church history who is responsible for creating these theses. Okay, so we have a purely Augustinian view of the fall and original sin. We have some moral frameworks that we're also bringing into the picture. Some interpretive lenses that could be questioned. There's a lot of things going on here that if I had an hour to talk to Alex, I'd go, Alex, we need to go bit by bit. You are making claims on claims on claims, and I don't even know if I even agree with the way in which you're setting this up, which is I wish that Greg would have asked Alex questions back. I mean, he's the tactics guy.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe he felt really put on the spot. I'm feeling Alex's energy. Maybe Alex, because I think that Alex was really wanting a pound of flesh in that moment. And maybe Greg kind of felt like, okay, I got to represent to the psychiatrist and to the host that I'm worth being here. Right. But I think that if I were Greg in that moment, right, we all say these things, right? But like, I would ask Alex a question back. Okay, now, Alex, do you understand what I just said? Do you understand there's a difference between moral experience and moral knowledge? Do you know there's a difference? Do you understand the argument I just made? Repeat it back to me. That's what I would have said to Alex, so that he understands what he's saying, because Alex is just trying to get to the next point here. But I mean, yeah, what do you want to add to that, man? This idea that Alex is smuggling in so many different frameworks and theses, acting like they're all self-evident when they can be easily discussed and questioned on their own basis.
Yeah, no, I mean that's exactly it. Is he has his own framework through which he interprets the Christian lens, and a lot of Christians don't agree with that, but he acts as though that's the Christian understanding, so he can internally critique it. And I think that's an issue, because as you just said, he's about to continue on as though Greg didn't say what he just said. Now, I'm not saying that Alex is being dishonest about that. I think it like you said, given time constraints, given the fact that Greg's put on the spot, Alex might not have quite gotten what Greg was saying, but he's about to claim that Greg didn't explain what he just explained. And I thought that was a little bit weird. Real quick, just to laser in on this, just so it doesn't get completely left aside, if anybody's wondering this, because I made the distinction earlier about the ability to sin versus the proclivity to sin. Eve had an ability. She had some level of awareness of right and wrong. But, and I forget the exact terms that Nate Sala used to point this out, but it's like she has an ability to do it or to not do it, to sin or to not to sin. Whereas we have freedom, and we have freedom not to sin, but not in the same way. We have such a strong proclivity, given our nature, given the world we're born into, that Eve was not in that kind of a situation. She wasn't like so bent towards sin. Certainly because, we know that even creation groans from sin. The fact that there are physical demands on our bodies, like to tend to like crops, thorns, and thistles, all that is new stuff that creates other demands on us. The fact that we have proclivities to lie to get out of certain situations, that those kinds of things weren't on Eve. So she had a much higher degree of freedom than we did. She obviously had the desire to determine right and wrong for herself, but she wasn't like so bent towards that sin like we are. And I feel like that is something new that's initiated by her actions. She has a degree of knowledge of what's right and wrong, at least insofar as God commanded them something, and God is not going to command them something if they don't know what it means. She has the ability and the desire to, but she's not bent towards it like we are. And I feel like when she makes that decision and then creation falls, now something new is initiated within us, that we're now born into a world that has much higher demands on us, that pulls us towards sin, and that our nature is now, that we inherit from Eve, that was initiated by her choice. We now have a nature that's bent towards that. I think that's important. Does how I put it make sense?
Yeah, I like to give people pathways. So I think that you did as good as a job as anyone could at giving a coherent explanation of this particular theory of what circumstances Eve was in for this kind of theory of the fall. I just want to even take the pressure off, like release the pressure valve for other people. Even if, right, for a lot of other Christians believe that what we're seeing is a snapshot of Israel's history, not the literal beginnings of humanity. Even still, it doesn't actually propose a problem for Christianity, because there is a great tradition within Christianity that doesn't view the fall as an accident, rather, but and Yahweh's dealings with Adam and Eve as a contingency plan, but views it as a part of the plan. So a lot of people ask this question. A lot of people will view the fall as, oh man, dude, if we didn't, you smack your friend, man, if you didn't sin, we wouldn't be in this situation. I used to think that when I was a kid. And hey, if you find it actually more helpful, anybody listening, if you find it more helpful, there's a church father named Irenaeus, and he believed and he wrote down extensively that God created Adam and Eve on purpose, in an immature, undeveloped moral state, so that they could learn through experience, through failing, how to be moral, how to be in the likeness of Christ, which is why humanity was created. So here's the thing: release the pressure valve. Even if Eve had this programmed proclivity to sin, it's not outside the Christian meta narrative. It's still within the Christian meta narrative. It still makes sense because it's still a part of God's plan. The only way this doesn't work is if this is outside of God's plan somehow. But here's a view. So I just want to put another view on the table. Both views are coherent. Both views have defenders. And so I just want to give your audience just like more ammo. Like if one person is jiving with what you're saying, great. If one person is jiving with what I'm saying, great. I just want everyone to know either way, there's no issue.
Yeah. I find it comical sometimes when atheists bring certain objections, as if there weren't 2,000 years, as you said earlier, of Christian history discussing these very things. Like it's brand new to us.
Exactly.
Like when people say, "Oh, you can just ask for forgiveness for your sins," that means you can just live your life as a murderer and do whatever you want, and just ask for forgiveness of your sins, as though Paul didn't address that himself when he said, "Hey, should we sin more so grace can abound?" By no means. Like we know about these things. Yeah. We've heard these things before. We've been discussing these things. Like.
Exactly.
We got this.
Exactly. I know, right? Bro, we have second century. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy.
To sin because Eve already had it. It does not explain the existence of evil because knowledge of that already existed before she committed the fall. It also doesn't explain the origin of suffering because, of course, Eve's punishment for eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Well, you're talking about suffering prior to human beings in animals. Okay,
I'm talking about suffering in human beings before the fall.
It does explain the...
What do you think he's referring there? Because he doesn't explain it. What do you think he's referencing when he says... Because I get from his point of view, again, I think he just assumes the proclivity to sin was there before without arguing it. But I at least get where he's coming from there. What do you think he just said? Because Greg Koukl said, "What do you mean, animal suffering?" He said, "No, human suffering." What do you think he's referencing there?
Yeah, I mean, the way that it comes off to me is like he's saying, when he says that it doesn't account for further human suffering, it sounds like to me he's saying, okay, so sure, Eve disobeyed God and was punished for it, but he doesn't see how we can bridge the quote unquote gap to, so now we all suffer because of it. And I mean, is he looking for like a mechanism, a process? Because the general kind of Christian understanding the meta narrative is God removed his protection from that community, from where they were in Eden, and which was going to contribute to their immortality. And so because they lost that privilege, all humanity is born into a mortal kind of like mode of existence, which would involve the, being subject to the environment, natural law, et cetera, and so forth, that existed outside of Eden. I mean, that's what the Bible says, like, yeah. What do you think he's asking?
I'm not sure, because he seemed to say, no, I'm not saying animal suffering before the fall. I'm saying human suffering before the fall. Now, what he might be doing is he might be presupposing, if he's working on evolution, he might think there were like humans before Adam and Eve, or at least alongside Adam and Eve, and he's just assuming they suffer because animals suffered, and so he's assuming that creatures are just kind of already prone to this, that the fall didn't result in at least exclusively human suffering. I guess maybe he's assuming a certain Christian view there. I'm not sure what he was getting at. I knew what he was getting at with the other things.
Yeah, it was also a good one as well. Yeah, I was thinking of it more in terms of it, because when I hear explaining suffering, I'm thinking of like, oh, that's also accounting for today. But that's a good point. If he's also thinking in terms of, well, hey, if there are pre-Adamic humans, just assuming that for a second here, pretending that's true for a second here. Well, they didn't live in Eden. They were prone to the natural elements. So they would have suffered naturally, right? So then how is that explained? Yeah, I mean, that would be good if that's what he's saying here as well. So yeah, maybe, yeah, that's good. Let's see what kind of how he kind of.
Yeah, I mean, at least to the other point, real quick, and again, just for people who are interested in engaging in these discussions and recognizing what's happening in the moment, sometimes people have, I don't want to say a script in a negative light, but a script they're trying to go with, an argument they're trying to go with. And so sometimes they'll jump right past what you said. And in my opinion, he kind of does that to Greg. Greg just gave an explanation, and then he just continues with, the story of Adam and Eve doesn't give an explanation. And it's because he already had this critique set up.
Yep.
And so I think if that happens to people in the moment, they need to say, well, hold on, I just gave an explanation. Maybe you didn't understand it. Let's go back to it. Because then Greg might just get caught and be like, oh, maybe I didn't explain it. I don't know. Or people might get caught off guard like that. And so just recognize when people are doing that.
Yeah, I'll second that as well. I think what's really important, and this is what I teach. I haven't plugged this yet, but in my academy, I run something called the Transcending Answers Academy, and inside the academy, I go over in painstaking detail with my students conversational dynamics and objection handling techniques. And one of the things that I'm really big on is, like, you have to hold what the person is saying. Like, you have to hold them accountable to their own words. Like, you have to be a Venus flytrap with every preposition, syllable, definite article, like all the grammar that leaves someone's mouth. You have to hold them accountable to it, so you don't end up in situations like this. It's really, really important. And that's what you're talking about. Like, that'd be really, really helpful here, which is, well, wait a minute. You're repeating yourself as though you didn't hear what I just said. So either I was unclear, or you're just disregarding everything I'm saying. Which one is it? Very simple, open-ended question. That'd be really helpful in these situations. And don't let yourself get kind of gaslit and going, oh, I guess I wasn't clear. I'm just going to have to, just accept the terms. Like, the person asking the questions, which is what Alex is doing, is in the driver's seat of the conversation. This goes for any person who's a pro at negotiating, right? Will tell you that the person who's asking the questions is in control of the conversation. It's all a battle of frames, right? Alex has a very strong frame right now. He's the guy asking the questions. His frame is, you're the one with the unique problem. I don't have an answer, so I don't need to bear the burden of anything. Dude, that doesn't fly with me. That doesn't fly with me at all. That doesn't work for Tim Howard. So I want to give Christians, like, in your audience, permission, like, be a Venus flytrap with every phrase and utterance that leaves somebody's mouth. Hold them accountable to what they say. Don't just take what they're taking for granted. Be a good question asker, good Socratic technician. That's kind of the way I view these sorts of things.
Yeah. And a guy like Andrew Wilson is a master at that. And people get so mad at him. They're like, oh, that's just semantics. That's rhetoric. He's like, yeah, semantics are kind of important in a debate. They're about definitions. Like, we should know the definitions that we're using and be really precise with our words. So that's funny.
It's so true. It is so true.
Fall of man, because human beings made a choice that they could have made differently, but they didn't. And their rebellion against God, it had a consequence.
But I don't think it could be called
and this
immoral
is why
decision.
the rest of the world has unfolded the way it has, why there is suffering, evil in the world. A naturalistic explanation can explain, suffering before, suffering after, but you've been very careful to make it clear that there's no moral ramifications to this at all. It seems most people are pretty aware that there are moral ramifications. So if your worldview does not have a way of making sense or moral intuitions about suffering, even animal suffering, it's not an adequate worldview.
Just give me a minute.
Yeah, so that's the end of that. And that was really important what Greg did at the end, which is tie it back into the other discussion. But again, Alex did that rhetorical point where he said, well, it's not immoral in my view, as though Greg didn't just explain that, yeah, Eve did have some knowledge of good and evil in order to sin. He explained that, and then Alex just goes right along with his argument that, oh, well, knowledge of good and evil means all moral comprehension, period. He just denies it. And then Greg did a really good job of just tying it back into the moral argument, pointing out that you don't have an explanation for the suffering, the Christian worldview does. And there's another reason that there are internal critiques fail, in my opinion, is because like for the internal critique to work the way it does, and you can tell me if you think I'm wrong about this, especially the way that a guy like Alex presents it, for me, there would have to be an actual like logical contradiction for the critique to go through. Because if there's not, then the very possibility of the theodicy working means that like, hey, there are other Christians working on this. They have different views. You can't claim one exclusive way that Christianity has to work and answer these questions. And if it doesn't, then it's contradictory.
Yeah, so I think that's really good thing to hone in on. So yeah, the issue here is he didn't drive home a therefore. Now he tried to say, well, it's not immoral what she did, but Greg already said, right? She already had some moral knowledge, and that's a minimum threshold for being held morally accountable. You're held accountable to your knowledge. Okay, well, she had already had some knowledge. She didn't have all knowledge, which would cover the experiential domain. Okay, well then she qualifies for being held morally accountable. He already said that. So what's the therefore here? Well, the two things I want to tell your audience is there's a difference between puzzles and problems. And philosophy today, if you take any philosophy class, philosophy has kind of switched from how to make rigorous argument to one of the things you'll focus on in any kind of 100 level philosophy class is like puzzles, paradoxes, and things like that. But I want to make it very clear to people that there's a difference between a puzzle and a problem. Something can be puzzling without it being a problem. What is something puzzling, right? Something puzzling is something that's just cognitively just difficult to figure out or to reconcile based on within a given framework. There might be some inconsistencies, but an inconsistency is not a logical contradiction and doesn't count towards incoherence. An inconsistency is claim A is not claim B, and claim B is not claim A. And an apparent inconsistency is not also a contradiction. That's a big thing people have to realize. Yeah. And it also doesn't mean that on the surface something looks inconsistent. It can be made consistent, right? And so a puzzle, just because something is puzzling, it's difficult to mentally wrap your mind around it, doesn't mean there's a problem. And a lot of people will ask why questions and think that they're giving arguments. But an argument has a therefore attached to it. Okay? But asking, well, why is this the case? I could literally, if I were Greg, I would have literally cut that conversation down to 2 seconds. You know why? Because I would have said, Alex, I grant everything you're saying. Please give me the therefore so I know exactly what the stakes are. What is it? What's the therefore? Therefore, God doesn't exist. Therefore, Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Therefore, the disciples made up a resurrect. Like what is the therefore? Right? I don't know what it is because Alex didn't give it. He just asked a bunch of why questions. Yeah. Problems, however, are the kinds of things that make you go rework what you once thought or reject what you once thought. So there's 2 things you can do with a problem. If there's a problem, you rework what you once thought or you reject what you once thought. But again, there needs to be an argument for there being a problem. Alex didn't give one. Just in case anyone didn't catch that. Yeah. Alex didn't give one. He mainly just kind of beg the question. What it means to beg the question is it's a form of circular reasoning. The conclusion you're attempting to justify is also a part of the chain of the justification you're using to justify the conclusion with. Alex said, well, hey, if Eve didn't have moral knowledge, then she can't be held accountable for not having moral knowledge. Greg's like, okay, but she had some moral knowledge. Well, still think it's immoral. Okay, but why though? I just told you. What are we doing? I don't know what we're doing. I thought we were doing something. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's my take on that.
Yeah. And I guess in part wrapping up, I mean, Alex is really focused on animal suffering, and what's wild to me about this is like, look, that's okay if like animal suffering really bothers you. Like, I get it, and if that's something you want to fixate on, that's fine. But what's funny is, again, from his emotivist standpoint, all he's doing is expressing his psychological dislike of it. No more than he might have an extreme dislike for a particular food, right? Imagine, hypothetically, that no one on earth shared Alex's hurt or distress over animal suffering. That would just be their psychological states, and then they would far outweigh his, right? Like, this is only a problem for him insofar as, like, you come to a particular worldview, and then all of a sudden, again, that's where the moral smuggling in. It's like, hey, on your worldview, there are certain moral presuppositions I have of your worldview that make this a problem for me. But at that point, it seems more so the reason you fixate on animal suffering is an effort to disprove Christianity, not because you see it as a genuine problem for reality. Because on his view, it isn't. That's just, that's just the way things are.
Yes, this is when arguments become weapons. And you got to be careful when arguments become weapons, rather than, because what Alex should be doing is Alex should not be able to tell me, Stelman, that he has not read the book On the Problem of Animal Pain by Trent Doherty, which is the most rigorous academic treatment of this problem. Alex should not be able to tell me, no, I haven't read that book. Dude, you're out here. You've had this conversation 100,000 times with a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers, but you haven't read the one book that potentially answers the problem. I thought that we're all honest truth seekers here. I thought that Aristotle, like Aristotle said, a mark of a critical mind is one that's able to entertain counter arguments as though it's their own and not believe them. What are we doing? Like, I would expect that Alex would have that standard for himself, because I've done it. I've read The Atheist Philosopher. I've read Elliot Sober. I've read Gregory Dawes. I've read J.H. Sobel. I've read J.L. Mackie. I've read Graham Oppie. Like, dude, imagine if I went out here making all these arguments and I didn't even read. Imagine I started making all these arguments against divine hiddenness. I didn't even read J.L. Schellenberg, who is literally the main proponent of that argument in academia. Yeah. And so the problem is Alex is out here acting. He talks with a level of authority that, again, is unearned, and that kind of goes back to the beginning of the show here, which is, the problem of quote unquote being overrated. Yeah, and to that point, before I say that, and that's one of the reasons that I've done the Atheist Advocate segment on this show, which maybe I could have you on for, where I play the atheist, and I've told every apologist, like Greg Koukl's debated me, Frank Turek's debated me, and I've told them ahead of time, look, I'm not looking to strawman the atheist. I'm not looking to just throw softball things for you to knock down. Like, I'm trying to beat you in this debate. I'm trying to win. And part of that for me is, like, I want to put myself in those shoes and make sure I steel man that position and think, if I were convinced of that worldview, how would I best defend it? That matters to me. That matters to me, to know what it is that I'm critiquing, to know what it is that I'm rejecting, and to know what it is, if I'm trying to coach other Christians and how to respond to those things. I don't want to just be teaching them how to steamroll people who don't know what they're talking about. It's like, no, how do you contend with the best arguments? And then that helps you, because then you have to come up with the best arguments in favor of what you believe in order to combat that. And so you have to have a sophisticated understanding of your own worldview. That's really important to me to do. And one thing that happened elsewhere in this very conversation that Alex did, which again, to me, just screams Christopher Hitchens, because, like, I know he knows better than this. He has to know better than this. And he does it anyway for rhetorical points, where he said, so, Greg, a kid is dying of cancer, and your explanation to them is two people sinned in a garden. Tim, as someone, I know that you have coached Christians in answering their own doubts. Has that ever been something you've told them to comfort them? Well, two people sinned in a garden. It's never once crossed my mind. I've never in my whole entire existence ever heard a Christian try to comfort someone with that. Yeah, that was a low one right there. Is what we call that, with what Alex did. And that was actually a complaint I made on Inspiring Philosophy's channel. I was like, hey guys, have you ever thought that, hey, maybe we should use this as a pastoral route? I don't know what again, what he on one side of his mouth, he says he's thinking within the Christian worldview, but then I don't know any Christian who adopts whatever he thinks, whatever worldview that is. Ain't anyone I know, any Christian I know who holds to. Yeah. Like, hey, that might be a worldview. I don't know any Christian who does hold that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I get it. He would respond to this by saying, well, I'm making a logical connection within your worldview, which you believe that, like, things like sickness and disease came in the world as a result of a sin. But it was the way he presented it. Like, that wasn't what he was doing in the presentation. It was, and because it was kind of response to, like, oh, well, you're saying I don't have anything to comfort the dying child. Well, how would you comfort him with this? So it was just a rhetorical point that's not any means by which, because again, we have soul building theodicies. And so this is, a point we can wrap up on that's a little bit unrelated, but not really. You kind of brought up earlier about God kind of creating Adam and Eve in a more naive state. And I believe Alex has made this point. I know other atheists at least have, which is they try to call this the problem of heaven, which is like, oh, so you're saying there's free will in heaven, but no sin.
Yep.
Oh, well, then why couldn't God have created that in the first place? Because you guys always say, well, the reason that sin entered the world was through free will. So that proves that. So either it's one or the other. Either you have free will and therefore sin, or free will not, therefore not sin. So why can't you create heaven right away? And Tim Stratton's made a brilliant argument, which is like the difference is Adam and Eve were completely naive. They did not live through suffering. They did not have any context of suffering to like. Again, they knew right and wrong, but to perceive the full consequence of what they were going to do. And by us going through I think only the greatest kinds of suffering that you can go through, do we get to a place in heaven where we now have the free will, but we no longer take a perfect state of affairs for granted. We no longer take for granted that there's not suffering. And now we like realize the full moral weight of sin. And so now we're in a position to have that free will and not abuse it. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, people have made this mistake, and I've made this critique elsewhere, but I haven't been too public about it. I think that this is a negative actual product of the principle of alternative possibilities view of free will. And if anybody has never heard of this, PAP for short, PAP basically says that you have free will insofar as in the exact same identical set of circumstances, you could have chosen differently. So I actually personally reject that view. I hold to actually what's called like more of a sourcehood model, which says that you have free will insofar as the source of a given action was choice. So it doesn't build in any assumptions about if you could have done otherwise. It just says that the source of your actions was a volitional one. And the reason why I think that there's a negative consequence of the principle of alternatives possibilities view, PAP, this is not to say that it's wrong or false in terms of its truth, but this is to say that people think that there's just this thing called free will. And what I always try to tell people is, no, there's human free will. We say that God has free will, but when I ask, hey, could God use his free will to sin? We would say no. So we're not talking about free will. We're talking about a certain kind of free will. We're talking about there's human free will. And the reason why I bring that up is because the will is oriented towards the thing that possesses it, right? And so if humans are the kinds of creatures like Socrates thought, which is lack of knowledge, ignorance leads to evil, then the idea is that if we have our knowledge, we orient our wills thus, right? Mm. So if the veil of ignorance is taken from our eyes in heaven, where God finally shows to us good for what it is and evil for what it is, the idea here is that we would have such a stark contrast and understanding for the first time, truly, how despicable and despisable evil is and how just much we want the good, that our wills would follow. That's the difference, right? Is that our wills would follow. So there's not this thing called free will. There's a will that we exercise freely, and that will is attached to many things, our current state of knowledge, right? So how properly functioning we are, how properly informed we are. So I like to make that point, right? Because that's why we can say so confidently that we wouldn't sit in heaven. But even still, dude, I just like to even grant the point. I go, yeah, God could have created us. So J.L. Mackie makes this argument that God could have created us with a kind of constitution where the range of options that our choices are able to touch don't go outside the bounds of good choices. Okay, there's no logical contradiction there. I don't see any logical contradiction there. You might, and if you do, maybe I'm totally open to saying that's a contradiction. But I'm just going to say there's no contradiction there. Okay, if there's no contradiction there, I go, so what? And they're like, well, what do you mean, so what? So how is God unjustified? How is God morally unjustified in creating us with the type of wills that we can use wrongly? Why is God unjustified for that?
Right.
So that's what I say. It's like, yeah, he could have created us already in heaven. And give me the
Right.
therefore, please. So I
Yeah.
always like to let them do the work. Well, I'm tired of doing the work. Okay. Or I'm always told I got to do the work. I don't see why I have to do the work.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's my whole thing. And we have answers. I have answer. Like, I think that there's a certain kind of value that only arises. There's only a certain kind of good that arises out of wills we can use wrongly. Not
Yeah.
to say that there's a world that's less valuable if we only use our wills rightly. No, it's just that there are goods that you just don't get if you always use your will correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's important. I know we're getting to the end here. I want to wrap up. There's so many things I'm going to mention briefly that we can get you back on, do more episodes on, because there are whole topics in and of themselves we can discuss free will. Because I agree with you in a sense where like sourcehood is my like primary definition. I got that from Eric Hernandez. Like, hey, if I'm the source of my decision, then I have free will. Right? I wasn't determined. I'm the source. Now, I do think in a lot of circumstances that necessitates the PAP, the principle of alternative possibilities. Like even for God, even if he's not free to sin, he's still free to do one good action or another good action.
Exactly.
As long as God himself is the source. So there's no problem there.
I agree.
There's another point about moral maturity that you made that I'm forgetting, but I guess maybe I'll say this lastly, and you can. God wants. Why didn't God create heaven right away? I think he wants a world, an eternal state of morally mature creatures, as opposed to just pets he's kind of taking care of. That's my opinion. Alex once said, it really struck me once when someone was saying that we wouldn't admire Martin Luther King if he didn't overcome tremendous adversity. He said, but then I'd kind of rather a world where there just was no tremendous adversity for him to overcome. And yeah, we might not know who he is, we might not admire him, but so what? At least there's less suffering in that world. And I thought, well, right, what right do you have if God wants morally mature creatures because they've gone through suffering? What right do you have to say, no, God, I prefer you didn't do it that way? I'd like just a bunch of more naive creatures because they don't have to face any kind of adversity. You don't have the right to determine what kind of universe God creates. Especially when he gives us sufficient grace.
It's objectifying as well, because what I actually think it does is it renders. I don't know if you've heard of the phenomenon of the indomitable human spirit, but I pray that every single person experiences at least once in their lifetime the indomitable human spirit, which is this ability that we have, this innate ability that if we choose to, we can overcome the worst of circumstances. And Alex, for whatever reason, thinks that it's more valuable. I said this to him when I debated him. I said, you have two choices. Either you believe the most important thing about someone, their value, is merely what happens to them, so their victimhood, or you value how someone responds to what happens to them. I choose the latter because I don't want to infantilize humans. I go, actually, no, it is a great good and it is in your best interest, and you will respect yourself more if you watch yourself overcome this. Alex wants to infantilize human beings and only focus on the fact that we're victims of our suffering. And so he doesn't want there to be any suffering. And that's just going to be a value disagreement. And at that point, just come out and say you're a hedonist, bro. Just stop being in the closet. Just say it. Just say the quiet part out loud, bro. You think that the most valuable thing is to be in a constant state of pleasure. Just if you just say the quiet part out loud, I respect you more for it. But not this meandering thing of like, well, like, no, like we're not going to do that.
Yeah, that was really beautifully put how you said that. And I'm really glad that you brought it up because I was wondering how to end on this because it felt kind of out of left field bringing it up, but it just came up naturally in what you said. And it was really brilliantly put. There's a discussion out there, even amongst Christian apologists, of like, how seriously should we take the problem of evil? Some Christians will be like, yeah, I don't take it seriously. And they kind of go the Graham Oppy route where Graham Oppy, who's an atheist himself, just says there is no problem of evil. And he's talking about a logical problem. But like Graham Oppy recognizes like, there's just nothing inherently contradictory within the theistic worldview that makes this something that refutes theism. And you can take that route. And then there are other Christians who talk about we need to take it gravely seriously. And they're talking about from an emotional standpoint, like, look, we need to be really serious about this and empathize with people. Here's where I come from. I'm going to say I don't take it seriously this is what I mean very specifically, because this was like a light bulb, not a light bulb moment for me, but a transformative experience for me where I went through some things. Again, and I'm not saying we shouldn't take it seriously in that we shouldn't be there for people. We shouldn't take their pain seriously and try to, be there for them in the best way we can and give them the best kind of counsel. But, when we're having these discussions, there are grand explanations like theodicies, generic explanations of why would God create a world of suffering. Then there's inevitably always the specific instances the atheist wants to bring up, and they'll talk about like something that's actually happened or hypothetical, and they'll cite like a very specific instance of suffering and be like, justify this. And we can't do that, right? We don't have the mind of God to know specifically why this child died of this thing. Here's the thing, though. I've walked through experiences with people who have gone through, actually lived through the very specific instances the atheists bring up as though they're supposed to refute God, and I've watched these people triumph and grow closer to God in them. That is what, for me, was just a transformative moment where I'm like, I just don't feel the weight. Maybe I'm being naive. Maybe I should see the weight for like intellectual reasons, but I don't feel the weight anymore when atheists bring these up as they're supposed to refute God, because I've seen people go through them. I've seen people get stronger. I've cried with people. I've not been able to offer them intellectual answers, just had to be there for them. And I watched them get closer to God through them. There's nothing like that. And when you go through something like that with someone, you just don't feel the emotional weight of this disproves God, because all of a sudden you get rid of God through the picture. And now what do you make of that thing you just went through with that person? Nothing. You've reduced to something like Alex's view, where you just have to say, well, there actually isn't any moral content to this. There isn't any explanation. There's no comfort. Which view is more likely? Which view is more reasonable? The one that has to deny it because your worldview presuppositions kind of demand that you deny it? Or the worldview that makes sense of it, offers redemption, a God of grace who will be there with you when this stuff is happening, no matter how painful it is, and offers you the possibility. Like you said, it's a choice. It's a choice you have to make. You can become bitter. You can become resentful. You can become like someone who, like Christopher Hitchens, who would shake their fist of God and who would probably meet God in the afterlife, and instead of fall to his knees and say I was wrong, say, how dare you? You can be like that, or you can trust God. You can seek him. You can grow closer to him. And then no matter what pain you went through in this life, no matter who you lost, especially if it's a child, you can be reunited to them. You can have purpose. You can have meaning. You can have all of that. It's a choice. Like you said, it's a choice. You have to make it. But you don't get to gaslight God for the kind of universe he creates if you made the choice to get better. If you made the choice to shake your fist at him, that's your fault. That's not God's fault. You can't gaslight God. Make a choice. Make the right one. Get a Bible, read it, go to Apologetics YouTube channels, go to Inspiring Philosophy, go to your channel. People can contact you if they're wrestling with doubts. Do that because it's worth it. And that was what this whole discussion broadly was about. We've lasered in on some key things, but broadly this discussion was about meaning and purpose. The Christian worldview is where it's found. And I really encourage people, go that route. It will serve you way better, not only in the long run in this life, but in eternity. I'll give you the last word on that.
Oh, man, beautifully said. Absolutely. You were preaching there. Love it. I was soaking that in. The only last thing I'll say is really good book. It's by a author called Jerry Sitzer, and he wrote a book called A Grace Disguised. Subtitle, How the Soul Grows Through Loss. And he goes through this book. He basically creates a manual based on his testimony of how to overcome suffering. He lost 3 generations of his family in a single car accident. He lost his mother, daughter, and sister. Mother, daughter, and wife in a single car accident. And he says simultaneously it was the worst thing that happened to him, and it was the greatest thing that could have spiritually happened to him. If you are having any seed of doubt, what Stellman is saying is that, well, if I just choose to overcome, I will overcome. Read that book. A Grace Disguised. You can get it on Amazon. It'll change your life. Yeah.
Yeah, well, listen, thank you, Tim, for being here. I'm really glad to be back after all these years. I'm really grateful to have you on. You've lended invaluable insights here and tremendous help to this episode, to this channel. I really appreciate it. Couple of last things. I want to remind people, download the Rumble app, follow me on Rumble. Do you have a Rumble account by any chance?
I've used Rumble only a few times. Yeah, I'm not on there too often though.
Well, let's get you on there. Let's start streaming. We're gonna try to get other people there. Your channel, YouTube, on YouTube, Worldview Mastery. People go there, subscribe. Any other ways people can follow you, support you?
Yeah, I'm really active on Instagram and TikTok, mainly Instagram. So if you actually want to, I completely encourage DMs. If you are struggling with any doubts or you are wanting to move to the next step in being able to defend your faith and increasing that ability, send me a DM and I will reach out to you and I will see if we can create you a plan, kind of get those things going. That's what I do. That's what I'm here to do. So if anyone wants to get to me like the most foolproof way, hit me up on Instagram.
Great. Well, with that, we are going to sign off from YouTube and Rumble. In the future, we'll continue on Rumble for some exclusive content. Not today. This is the end for today. Again, thank you so much, brother, for being here. And everybody, we will see you next time on the Unapologetic Apologists.